Hi everyone. In this series of videos, I'm taking you step by step through everything you need to do and everything you need to know to get your quad flying brilliantly on Betaflight 4.3. Whether it's a tiny little micro quad like this, or a big honkin' 7-inch like this AOS 7. In this video, we're going to be covering backing up your settings from a previous version of Betaflight, flashing 4.3, and then transferring your settings over so you can get your quad up in the air on Betaflight 4.3 for the first time. If you like this t-shirt, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it right at the end. But in the meantime, let's get into it. The first thing you need to do is to download and install Betaflight Configurator if you haven't already. Now you can find it on this GitHub page, and I'll put a link to the releases page down in the video description. Depending on when you watch this video, the version number of the latest release might be different. Don't worry about that. Just scroll down and look at this assets section. You might need to expand it and choose the correct one for your platform. I'm on Windows, so I'm going to pick Win32 and I'll just download that. And then once it's downloaded, you can go ahead and install it. Once you've installed the program, you can open it from the start menu, and when it loads, you should see a screen that looks like this. You have a selector up here to select different COM ports. You may have several COM ports or none at all visible. When you plug your flight controller in over USB, after a few seconds, you should get an additional COM port in this menu. Select that one, because that one's the one that corresponds to your flight controller, and click Connect. And if everything goes well, you should see a screen that looks like this. If for some reason connecting doesn't work, you may need to run the Impulse RC driver fixer to install the drivers for the flight control software. I'll put a link to the Impulse RC driver fixer down in the video description for you. This is Betaflight Configurator, and you can change all the settings on your quad here. But for right now, what we need to do is make a backup of our configuration. So we're going to go down to this side panel and select the CLI. You'll see this black screen. And then into the command line here, I want you to type diff, D-I-F-F, space, -all, and hit enter. And then you should see all of these different terms appearing in the command window. Don't worry about them for now. Just click Save to File in the bottom right, and then save the file somewhere you're going to remember it. And that's all you need to do. At this point, you can disconnect. Welcome to the secret part of this video. If you're watching this, that means that Betaflight 4.3 and the corresponding configurator 10.8 are not yet released. Now, I am not going to recommend that anyone use unreleased software on their quads. There have been reports of smoked motors and blown ESCs on Betaflight 4.3, and that is not surprising because it is unreleased software. It may have bugs in it that we don't know about yet. However, if you are desperate to try Betaflight 4.3 and you accept the risks, I've got some builds of both the configurator and Betaflight 4.3 that are known to work together, and I've put links to those down in the video description. Once Betaflight 4.3 is released, I'm going to delete this section of the video, and I'm going to remove those links, and you should use the official builds. And also, no one is going to believe that I wore this hat because there will be no evidence. You have been warned. Let's continue. Now, before we continue, we want to make sure that that diff has saved correctly. So open it up and check it looks something like this. Should say diff all and then a bunch of different text detailing all the differences between your configuration and the Betaflight defaults. A value that's really important that we want to remember is this board name here, because that's going to tell us what target we need to flash when we flash to 4.3. So I'm remembering that for me, this is Mamba F722. Your board name is likely to be different. Once you've remembered that board name, we can go and update the firmware. You're going to go and select Release and Release Candidate. You're going to choose the board name. For me, it was Mamba F722. And then you're going to select the latest build of Betaflight 4.3. Now, as of the time of recording, Betaflight 4.3 has not yet been released, So I'm going to be using a development build. And I'm going to be using build 2542, which is known to work well with this version of the configurator that I'm using. And I'll put a link to this version of the configurator down in the video description. This section of the video I'm going to remove once Betaflight 4.3 has actually been released. Then go and click Load Firmware and Flash Firmware. You may get this warning if you're flashing a development build. Read it, understand it, and then if you're okay, assume responsibility and flash it anyway. Once the flashing is complete, you should see this programming successful green bar. If something goes wrong, you may need to reinstall your drivers using AOS RC driver fixer, and I'll put a link to that down in the video description. Now go back to the welcome screen, unplug and re-plug in your flight controller. It should be detected and you can click connect. At this point, you'll get a notice about applying custom defaults. Always apply custom defaults. You may need to click connect again. At this point, you'll get a warning about not having a calibrated accelerometer. So let's go ahead and calibrate our accelerometer. Make sure the quad's on a level surface and click calibrate. Now at this point, we could go through and set up our quad as if from scratch again, going through every single one of these settings. What I'm going to suggest instead is that we carefully copy and paste certain things from our previous diff back into Betaflight 4.3. So let's go to the CLI and get started. You need to be very careful when copying and pasting diffs between different versions of Betaflight. Sometimes settings that worked well in a previous version of Betaflight can cause big problems in a more recent version. And sometimes the names of settings will have changed between versions. In order to help you with copying and pasting your diff between Betaflight 4.2 and 4.3, I've created this little guide. Lines containing the words that are in the green box are likely to be safe to paste between 4.2 and 4.3. However, lines that contain gyro, ACK, dterm, dyne or RC are not safe and you shouldn't paste them between Betaflight 4.2 and 4.3. If you're unsure whether a certain line is safe to copy and paste from a diff of Betaflight 4.2 into 4.3, check below because I'm going to leave a pinned comment on this video that details which lines are safe and which lines are unsafe to copy and paste. If you can't find the answer you need in that pinned comment, leave a comment on the video and I'll reply to you and update the pinned comment with what we find out. So here we are in Betaflight 4.3 CLI, and on the left side of the screen I have my diff from 4.2. And I'm going to follow the rules that I just talked about and copy and paste the safe parts of my diff into Betaflight 4.3. So looking at the first lines, we see we've got feature, beacon, map, serial and orgs. All of these are safe terms. So I'm going to go and copy and paste these into the CLI and then press enter. You'll see that should come up. Then we see we have some lines containing gyro, dyne and ACK. These are unsafe terms, so we're not going to paste these. But then we have some more safe terms. Min check, max check, serial again, that's okay. Blackbox, D-shot, all of these are okay. So we're going to copy and paste these safe lines in. Then we have another line with gyro in. So we're not going to paste that. But name is safe, so we're going to paste the name. Again, more dyne and now dterm lines, so we're not going to be pasting those in. Now, for the PID values, these are your PID values. I think you probably can copy and paste those in if you're careful, but for this guide, we're going to be starting with default PIDs, and that's actually what I suggest you do as well. So I'm not going to be pasting these in, but I am going to be pasting in my idle min RPM value because that's safe, as well as my rates. Now you may see after you've done this that you get some invalid names. That simply means that the name of this setting has changed from Betaflight 4.2 to 4.3 and that it's not going to have pasted that value, and we're going to have to set that up manually later. Once you've finished pasting, you can type save and hit enter, and that will save the changes and should save you a lot of time configuring Betaflight 4.3. So now that we've copied and pasted a diff, most of our settings should be set correctly. But I like to walk through the configurator anyway and check that all the settings look sensible. So we'll start with the ports tab. And I'll just check that I've got a serial receiver and an MSP connection set for the DJI Air unit in this quad. So that looks good. I'm not going to touch that. Let's go into our configuration tab. Check that our PID loop frequency is set to 8K if you're using an F7 processor, or 4K if you're using an F4 processor. Our maximum arm angle I always set to 180 degrees so that I can always arm the quad. And I like to turn on D-Shot beacon and set the beacon tone to 3, and the RX lost and RX set are both on. That'll make sure the motors beep when you use the beeper on your quad. In the features tab, I like to make sure I have soft serial on if I need it, telemetry on, air mode, this should always be on. If you're getting a sort of wobbling around at 0 throttle, it might be that you don't have air mode switched on. OSD on, and the dynamic notch filters on as well. And if you're using a GPS, you might have this on and then some settings below for the GPS. I don't have one on this quad. Power and battery, I rarely change or adjust anything here. However, if you calibrate your voltage meter and current meter on your flight controller, then this is where you would do that, and it works the same as previous versions of Betaflight. For failsafe, the default failsafe settings should work for you, and only change these if you really know what you want to do. I leave them at default for my freestyle quads. PID tuning, we're going to leave all of this at default because we want to fly the quad with a default tune before we start doing anything with PID tuning. Now we're in the receiver tab, you're going to want to power on your radio.
Welcome to HTX.
And power on the receiver in your quad. Now, depending on how your quad is wired, it might power up over USB, or you might need to plug a battery in. In my case, I need to plug a battery in. And you should see that the receiver tab changes, and that when you move the sticks on your radio, the bars on the receiver tab move up and down. You want to check that the roll, pitch, yaw and throttle bars all move with the corresponding sticks. If they don't, you may need to change your channel map. You also want to check your stick endpoints. So check that all of your sticks go down below 1000 and above 2000. They should do. And if that's the case, you're going to want to set your stick low threshold to 1000 and your stick high threshold to 2000 to try and reduce the amount of deadband you have at either end of your sticks. If your sticks don't go down below 1000 and above 2000, then you might need to calibrate your sticks on your radio. I would leave all the RC smoothing settings alone at default for now. Now the modes tab should be set up correctly if you've copied and pasted a diff, so you shouldn't need to change anything here. You should have at least your arm mode. I always like to also set a pre-arm, so I need to flick a switch to pre-arm, and then I need to flick another switch to arm the quad. This helps avoid accidentally arming the quad, and it helps make things a lot safer. So I would suggest that everyone should have a 2-stage arming set up. Whether you have it set up in the radio or whether you have it set up in Betaflight like this using the pre-arm function is up to you, but it's definitely a good thing to do. Also make sure you have a mode set for the beeper. In the motors tab, the main thing you're going to want to be doing is checking that your motor direction is correct. If you're running props out, you need to tick motor direction is reversed here. It should be ticked already if you've pasted a diff. You'll want to turn on bidirectional D-Shot. If you don't know if you've got bidirectional D-Shot enabled, the first video in this series takes you through how to get that set up. And you're going to want to check that your motor order and your motor direction are correct. And you can do that using these handy wizards in Betaflight 4.3. So we'll start with the ordering of the motors. So we can open this. Really make sure that your propellers are removed. You should never have props on when you have the quad plugged into CLI and when you have a battery plugged in. So if you have a battery plugged in and you're plugged in over USB, take your props off. And that will confirm your motor order. And then we can go into motor direction. And for me, those are all correct. Your OSD settings should be set correctly if you've pasted a diff, but you can take the time now to make sure that all of the elements are correct and in the right positions. This quad uses the DJI video system, so there's no configuration to be done in this tab. If you're using an analog video transmitter that supports smart audio or tramp telemetry, hopefully you've copied and pasted the relevant configuration over from 4.2 to 4.3 and this is all set up correctly. If not, I'll put a link down in the video description to a video that explains how to set that up. And the final thing we're going to do is set our black box configuration correctly. Now this is really important because the next thing we're going to do is fly the quad on stock Betaflight settings. We want to set our black box logging device to either onboard flash or SD card. We don't want to use serial port unless you're using something like an open lager, in which case you know you need to, but set it to onboard flash or SD card and set the logging rate to 2 kHz. The debug mode should be gyro_scaled, and that will give us the information we need to do our filter tune in the next video. Once you have that set correctly, you can save and reboot. And you're going to want to erase the onboard data flash chip to make sure that you have a clean slate with plenty of space to store the log. This can take a few seconds, but it does usually complete without errors. Now you can hit disconnect. Okay, so if you've followed those steps, then you're ready for your first test flight on Betaflight 4.3. So the first thing to do is to just arm the quad, take off, hover, and listen for any rough sounding motors. Then go for a little fly, no more than 30 seconds, don't go too far, and come back and check the motor temperatures. If everything is still feeling good, then you can do a little bit more flying, maybe a bit of freestyle. But go slowly initially and keep checking those motor temperatures and keep listening to the quad to make sure everything is okay. I'd advise for your first flight, you only fly over soft grass, so that if something does go wrong and you do crash, you don't damage anything. If all of that goes well, you're going to be ready for my next video, which is a complete filter tune on Betaflight 4.3 with and without black box logging. Get subscribed so you don't miss that one. So it's time for me to tell you a little bit more about the t-shirt that I've been wearing whilst filming this video. So I recently passed 10,000 subscribers, and I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who's subscribed to my channel. I'm really grateful to all of you for making that happen. To celebrate that, I wanted to create some technical prints that I could put on t-shirts and wear while I'm filming these videos. This is the first one. It's an exploded AOS 5. You can see all of the internal components, the standoffs, the screws, the structure of the frame, even the battery and action camera as well. Now I've also done some prints for the AOS 3.5, the AOS 5.5 and the AOS 7. And I've made a little store where you can pick these up, either printed on t-shirts or hoodies or other things, whatever you want really. So I'll put a link to that down in the video description. And if you like any of the designs that I'm wearing today or in any of my future videos, you can go to that store and pick one up for yourself. That's all I have for you for today. So until next time, I wish you all very, very happy flying.